just start next. So just keep that in mind if you have your camera on as well. So without further ado, I did want to take some time to give each of the panelists adequate time to introduce themselves personally, because they really are a fantastic group of people. And they have truly been so gracious to spend the evening with us and kind of walk us through their experience as being, you know, successful Black leaders in their respective roles. So why don't we start with Simone?
Oh man, no, totally fine. Hello, everybody. Super excited to see so many people join in on the conversation today. To briefly introduce myself, I think the tenet that I try to live my life by is to really be working towards a world and where people's zip codes do not determine their outcomes. And so throughout my life, I've been acutely aware that where you are born and what race you are and what gender you are has a lot to do with how successful you are in life. And so I've sort of built my life around figuring out what the recipe to success that out and having an impact on that is for me. So spent some time in education, taught in Atlanta public school system, was really passionate about the school to prison pipeline and having an impact on that through education as well. Then spent some time working in the opposite end of the world, worked at Bridgewater Associates, just hedge fund globally in a human capital capacity. And then went back to the nonprofit world and worked in recruiting with Teach for America. Took some time away from the professional world to go back and get my MBA. While in school, I was really passionate about social impact and leveraging private sector for opportunities to impact the public sector, which is a core tenet of what I do now at McKinsey and Associates. I'm an associate, at McKinsey and Company in the DC office, and have worked with clients across the spectrum, but really am passionate about higher education, public sector work, and really figuring out how to support Black and Brown communities going forward. So that is me.
Awesome, thank you, Simone. Next we have Meryl.
Awesome. Well, I just, first off, before I even introduce myself, I just want to commend you guys on, taking the first step to actually have this conversation. It's a very important conversation. It's not just applicable to Bay Street, it's applicable across the country on both sides of the border. So kudos to all of you on the team who really come together to start this event. So a little bit about myself professionally. I'm originally from South Africa, immigrated to Canada about 11 years ago, where I started working in the fintech space in Winnipeg. From there, I moved on to a role in commercial banking at CIBC in Edmonton. And so selling products to companies that work in oil and gas operations, government, First Nations as well, and covered a territory from Edmonton up to and including Yellowknife before I moved to Toronto, where I focused more on product and how to create products that businesses, small business, large corporates utilize, as well as my new role right now, where I'm focused on policy and payment bylaw review for a industry-wide initiative called Payments Modernization, where we're reshaping the way that you as a consumer make your payments. So that's sort of my professional side. In terms of my advocacy side, as I mentioned, I think somebody is talking. So as I mentioned, I'm originally from South Africa. So, I was part of that initial first generation of folks who went from segregated schools to non-segregated schools as South Africa transitioned from apartheid to the post-apartheid life. So for myself, advocating for Black people is extremely important because I, myself, my family, everybody that I know that's of color has been on the receiving end of the bad parts of apartheid, how it hit us economically, from being told where to live, to what schools you could go to, your parents not being able to go to school because of the color of their skin. And so being the president of CAUFP right now, we look to really ensure that Black professionals on Bay Street have equitable access to thought leadership, professional development, as well as working with corporations to build their talent pipelines and help us to mobilize folks from university into internship programs, but all the way up into executive roles as best we can.
Awesome. Thank you, Meryl. Next, we have Anthony.
Hi everyone, how's everyone doing today? I hope everyone's keeping safe. Really, really excited to join this conversation. I echo Simone and Meryl so far in terms of, this is the right time to discuss this. A bit about myself. I am Nigerian, British, now Canadian. So I am sort of United Nations, if you want to call it that way. Range of experiences working in England, which I'm going to I'll go into just in a second. But I've been in Canada about 7 years now, and worked in 3 banks out of the 5, and so really I've been at the forefront of Bay Street, trying to really climb up and get into sort of senior management. My current role is at BCG. My area of focus is the global data governance at BCG at the moment. Really looking into digital and data platforms in terms of how to make companies more bionic, even at BCG as well. My previous experience has been at TD, Scotiabank, and CIBC, and also got some consulting experience with Deloitte and EY. So really and truly worked at a lot of these major brands. And so really looking forward to the conversation we're going to have today in terms of how my personal journey has been so far. What do I stand for? I stand for equity as a person. I believe that everyone should have equal opportunities. And I believe also that not just on paper, but practically. And that's one of the reasons why I'm very excited to be on the panel today. So thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Next, we have Trisha.
Good evening, everyone, and echo Anthony's well wishes. I hope everyone is doing well. My name is Trisha Gazarek, and I am grateful to be part of this panel because it's a continuation of a conversation that started with George Floyd's death. And I think the reality is the conversation is actually allowing us to look at what are some of the opportunities for real change, and the greatest potential change that we can create in our community. I think it starts with the opportunities that we are granted, the opportunities that are there that just needs to open up and be realized for Black members and other colored members of society. I myself, I am Jamaican born. I lived there for half of my life, then came to Canada and matriculated here in the education system. And even still yet, being sort of, getting my education here in Canada, experienced a lot of barriers coming out of school, getting into the employment landscape, and still yet finding it very hard to break through the limitations that I saw other people putting on myself. So what I ended up having to do is to create my own opportunities, which is the realities for a lot of successful Black business owners, Black leaders in Canada, is what they have done is to see the barriers and say, I'm going to ignore those barriers and create my own opportunity, create my own success. So I'm really grateful to be part of this panel discussion, because what it has done for me is to recognize, there is this strength in numbers, and the opportunity right now is for us to continue to amplify the reality of we need to continuously look at all the different ways in which anti-Black racism is part of the fabric of Canada. BIPOC voices are needed and valuable. And what diversity and inclusion means is something that is kaleidoscopic in a way. It's not a one size fit all, and it really needs to be something that's mediated through the concerns of the individuals, expressing those concerns to the individuals with the power or the capacity to create change. So thank you so much for having me in this panel.
Thank you, Trisha. Next, we have Arnold.
Thank you very much. So name's Arnold Flowers. I've been with AWS or Amazon Web Services for just about a year now. I'm a sales leader within there. Prior to joining AWS, I was actually with IBM for 13 years, Microsoft for 2 years, and Oracle for 4 years. What has been extremely important to me is understanding that there are individuals in tech or in a leadership space that do not look like me. and I want to make sure that I am being a role model and example for those who can see that it is achievable. I was born in Toronto, but raised in the Bahamas. So for me, being part of IBM, I was part of the Black IBM networking group from an affinity standpoint. Also from Oracle, at the time that I joined, they did not have a affinity group, a Black affinity group within Oracle, and started that one from a Canadian perspective. With my current role at AWS, I've been fortunate enough to now, with the recent events that have transpired, been able to chair a subcommittee on diversity and inclusion. And the uniqueness of this particular subcommittee is where in other organizations that I've worked for, there are multiple layers of bureaucracy that you would then have to go to drive initiatives. With this particular initiative, I have essentially been entrusted by the head of AWS Canada and the head of HR for AWS Canada to ingest the mood and the feeling of the employees and be able to pass that back as a conduit to the leadership team so they can impact change. So that is extremely important. I do feel that corporate culture is on a journey the same way individuals are on journeys in terms of how do we get from reactive allyship to proactive allyship. What does that look like? In talking to some of the managers, it's not that they're not comfortable talking about that, they just don't know where to start the conversation. And we want to help with that. Another thing that is really important is I want to be able to demystify tech and tech sales, because I think it's, whether you're in sales, technical, or a leadership position, those are the jobs that are recession proof. Those are the jobs that are future proof. And so often I've been in organizations where the first jobs to go are operational jobs. And, it just so happens there are, we're located in those jobs. So when there's layoffs and when there's cuts on the outside, it looks like we're the ones who are impacted, but it's part of how we position ourselves. So it's very important that we build a sales pipeline. For me, the last thing that I would say is, I know that we talk about diversity and inclusion a lot. I think that we need to really change the lens and really change the focus on belonging and what does belonging look like. And I know that, throughout this conversation, we're going to talk about, what it means to bring your true self to your job. And that's, I think, something that we should all aspire for, or our organization should aspire for, I should say.
Amazing. Thank you, Arnold. And finally, we have Schulich's very own Collins.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're all staying safe. My name is Collins. I was born and raised in Nigeria. I lived all my life and my professional life there till about 6 years ago when I moved to the US to further my education. So when I moved here, I found out that, there are a lot of things, working in America, you have to, go extra mile to be part of the system. You have to do a whole lot to be part of the system. So I had to create my own consulting company after my first master's. I created my own consulting company trying to work with African entrepreneurs that are based here who are looking for funding, because when I moved here, I was able to, interact with good people that are like VCs in Washington, DC, San Francisco. So I found out that, I need to use this, my connection to, help my community, my Black community living in Washington, DC area. So I created the company. I created other, social organizations like Think Africa, where we have young African professionals in diaspora. We, connect on a monthly basis. We organize like an event, people that have startups, come here, let's see what you do. Let's see how we can help you. Let's see how, we ourselves can even patronize the business, or we ourselves can even link you up to someone that would fund you and scale you up. That's how, I, started working. Then I noticed that, as a consultant and, trying to, be there and, get to extra mile, I applied for my business school at Schulich. So I got in. I'm a second-year student at Schulich School of Business. And, since I got there, it's been very impactful. So and I've been, been able to, work within people in Toronto, Africa, and Washington, D.C., and America as a whole. So it's really a great opportunity for me to be here today and, talk about my experience, because I've worked in corporate America 9 to 5. I worked in America while I was running my consulting company. I still, do 9 to 5 up until September last year, when I, left for school full time. So I'm excited to be here and looking forward to hear from everyone and learn from everyone's experiences. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So I guess we'll get right into the conversation at hand. I'm sure, as everybody is aware, in the past few weeks, we have seen almost every major corporation and company publicly condemn racism. And we're seeing executives that are making multi-million-dollar pledges to anti-discrimination policies and programs. But at the same time, it's those exact same companies that are doing this that are actually contributing to systemic inequality. And they're doing this by failing to either hire, promote, or fairly compensate their Black employees. And so I guess the first question that I would pose to the panelists is, where have you seen unfair roadblocks in your professional experience? And has it ever been the case that your company is very openly expressing commitments to diversity, but then at the same time, they're very obviously acting disproportionately towards Black employees internally?
So I can kick that off. I would say, I think in general, most corporations are well-intended with, them starting sort of the diversity initiatives. And I think we saw that with them coming out and making very bold statements, trying to sort of write big checks to the community. But I think what's been great is because of these continued protests and these continued sort of more intentionality behind how people are consuming products right now. If you think about it, we call it sort of ethical consumerism. People are really thinking good and hard about how and where they're moving their money. An example of that is the rebranding of, for example, Aunt Jemima and all these other products that we've seen. So I think, corporations are realizing some of these structures that they put in place are no longer really going to work. So you can have a Black employee resource group, you can sort of donate to Black organizations, but if you are not intentionally putting a strategy in place to understand, okay, we're going to an event that has university students, but how are we intentional about hiring, for example, Black or Indigenous or just BIPOC students in general, not lumping them all in together, right? Understanding that even when you're going out to court these students or these professionals, understanding even the process of looking through their resumes, right? So for a student who is struggling, they may not necessarily seem as well-rounded in a sense as a student who has the ability to join clubs and that type of thing, because they're not having to necessarily work through school, right? So having to sort of think beyond the tradition of how you're just hiring people, and then once you get them in, thinking about how do you actually move them up. So something that's common right now, particularly on Bay Street, is that you see a lot of Black people kind of getting stuck at a particular level. It's sort of this glass ceiling that nobody really wants to talk about. And so we have things like the Black North Initiative that's been launched recently, where they're asking CEOs to really pledge towards moving folks into these executive levels and on the board, because when you have somebody on the board who's making those strategic decisions, essentially what that's going to do is it means they're going to be intentional about how they think about their workforce, right? And how do they implement policies that are going to affect that and mobilize sort of the talent pipeline. So I think we're really having sort of that, awakening on being more intentional. Is everybody doing that? Is every organization doing that? No. We would like for everybody to do that, but I think we're seeing more progression now than we have in the past, and that I can only speak for sort of the financial services industry. I'm sure the other panelists can speak more to the industries that they're working on, what they're seeing right now.
So Mary, I'll just chime in here and just add to it. And I'd like to say up front that the intention of being here as well is also to educate some of the MBA graduates or soon to be graduates. Or so I've been in positions where I've had to hire, and I'll be honest with you, just like you said, Meryl, that there's something called diversity ratio and inclusion ratio in some firms on Bay Street. That's the fact. And sometimes you're very confused with the fact that you want to make sure that you're making the field level, right? But at the same time, it's almost kind of like struggling between talents and race. You know, it's something definitely that I've experienced before. So what are the roadblocks? I feel like, you know, I've always felt personally when I started off in my career in Canada that I'm probably just checking the box. I felt that way before.
Yeah.
And therefore, to your point, when you're checking the box, there's no progression, but there's no career path being chiseled out for you in that sense. And what are the reasons? When you go to a company or to a firm and you're not seeing people that look like you, then you already kind of feel like the two things are limited. Hopes and aspiration are limited. So if you aspire, say an MBA graduate, for instance, you've done the aspiration part of things. Hope is therefore belittled because you can't see a path forward. And so that's happening so far. And I feel like, you know, that given all that happened with BLM and George Floyd, you know, the same way firms are being actionable on cutting down on carbon footprints, we need to see more. So I personally feel like in an already small market that Toronto is compared to others, say America or England, that the opportunities for people of color or minorities in this case are there enough? And I feel like the roadblocks are the fact that the diversity ratio for companies need to be looked into again. I don't believe that it's balanced, and I feel like we need to do more, or they need to do more, essentially.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I think what we've seen is, for example, the reason why I mentioned the Black North Initiative is because what it's doing is it's giving these 7 steps that they want companies to commit to, right? Whereas before they would just say, okay, we're hiring and we're going to mobilize and say, move out BIPOC employees X% and move them up the pipeline. But when we look at that, Black and Indigenous folks really don't, you know, benefit from that. We're always left behind. It's the same thing when you look at gender equality, right? For the most part, it's only benefited Caucasian women more so than any other race. And so I think now we're sort of kind of putting the feet to the fire to say, okay, you have to set real goals and real targets for when you're going to achieve this by. And again, at the end of the day, it's sort of, we're hoping that they stick to this, because right now it's a hot topic, it's exciting, but like with everything in life, you know, the news cycle changes and something else becomes the hot topic and the flavor of the month. And so I'm always saying, that's why I think even ethical consumerism is so important, because, for example, if you bank at a bank and they're not complying to certain things, it's not just about, am I getting a great rate? You have to say as a consumer, do I want to put my money in this institution that doesn't uphold the values that I have, you know, as a consumer, right? The same way how you purchase products that are ethically sourced, all of these things. And I think we sometimes forget that we do have purchasing power, even though we're only a small percentage of the population. But that's kind of how we also try to hold folks accountable outside of working there, advocating internally. We have to hit it on many different angles, right?
I think two things that I was going to touch on that, two things that I was going to touch on that I think you both alluded to, and one is a little bit of imposter syndrome, and I definitely hear that like absolutely a roadblock that I faced initially, I think in my career, was a lot of, do I belong in this room? But I think on the flip side of that is also the people who are around me have to think also, they also think, does she belong in the room? Because there's so few of me. And like, let's be real about the numbers. There's ever in the Fortune 500 only been 2 Black female CEOs. And so just as much as I might not believe in myself, a lot of the people around me don't believe in me, because they've never seen someone like me. And not only there's a lot of white supremacist ideals that we've been taught throughout our lives. And so I think that one barrier is a huge one that I've faced, is you know, what other people believe that I am capable of and what I believe I am capable of. I think the second one is also coming to the realization that in many ways, just being my truest self, wearing my hair the way that I want to wear it, showing up in my full humanity is an act of revolution in a lot of ways. I exist in spaces that are predominantly white and predominantly male, and so even the tone of my voice, the way that I choose to communicate, in a lot of ways is not typical of the ways in which the people around me have been socialized to interact. And so I think as a Black woman in corporate America, a lot of what I've been taught about how to present myself doesn't necessarily apply. And so there's a lot of relearning that you have to do around identity that I think is huge.
Yeah,
for
I
me,
think
You know, Simone, I think you bring up a really good point there, because I've experienced the same sort of roadblocks in the sense that the people around me, they're confused as to whether or not I fit, and they struggle to see that fit. And even as educated as I am, as qualified as I am, somehow because of color, sex, hair, clothing, my fit doesn't align with a colonial Caucasian male, senior male at that too. So what it is, as you've mentioned, is this relearning of breaking down a very colonial view of what it means to be leaders in society. We have very strong associations to images of, especially in my world, what a mediator looks like. You probably Google mediator and it's probably a old Caucasian male, most likely. If you Google mediation office or dispute resolution services, you're going to see banners of Caucasian old male. So that is part of the struggle that I've seen, is to continuously having to advocate for myself and advocate for representation. The people who are in conflict, the people who are struggling in their workplace environments because of the relationships they have, or because of the operation of that business itself, if they're not seeing people part of the problem solving environment to fix the issues, it is really difficult for them to say, yes, the business has a buy-in, the people in the conversation have a buy-in, and the changes are actually going to happen. And so, you know, I really applaud the fact that Arnold is part of that. Sorry to bring you up Arnold, but Arnold is part of that change that is potentially there within Amazon, because you need to have representation at the table for conflict that deals with people of difference, people that are quote unquote different from that colonial framework. It needs to happen. The other side of that is, for me, being part of that roadblock experience has allowed me to say, encouraged me to say, you know what, the next time I see someone going through a roadblock, feeling the same barrier, feeling that same frustration, I need to also now take up some responsibility to help them push down that roadblock. What is it that I can do to encourage them? What is it that I need to do to the people on that table to say, hey, take in their perspective as well. Really take heed as to what's happening here, because it's not just, oh, they're not fitting into the culture, or, you know, their viewpoints is somehow not valid. No. The difference is actually allowing for the corporation to thrive. If we actually take that viewpoint and glean from it what innovation, what creative ideas that individuals bringing into the table, but they're frustrated by the structural impediments that are there.
Yeah, for me,
Collins, I think
that mostly the roadblocks are mostly systemic. They're mostly systemic. Most of this leadership in companies, they don't know the realities Black people face. I'll give you an example. I've been on an interview panel where, everybody was white. I was the only person. The interview was I was a Black person, right? Everybody's white. So if a company makes a great effort to diversify their company or have 2% of their staff Black, if you want to interview a Black man, you already know this person is a Black man. Why have, white male, interviewing me in a panel? We can never, no matter how smart I am, we can never, have a rapport. We can never, have same thing in common. They would see a fault of, not hiring me. I've gone to interviews where, finished interview, I was, I took over the whole stage. I was able to answer everything. I was like, oh, yo, you know what? I've gotten this job. Yeah. And just come back, the recruiter was like, oh, sorry, we moved on to the next episode. And then you're very close to the recruiter. You ask why? Because to me, I felt like I killed it. Like, I feel that I should have this job. I got a response that, oh, I was talking too much. I was overshadowing them. I'm like, it's your interview. It wasn't my interview. You were asking me a question, right? I was answering the question. So do you not have a problem me representing myself? Well, because I didn't go to the same school you went to. I don't live in the same neighborhood. So if this company want to really work on, diversity, inclusion.
Mhm.
If you're interviewing a Black man or a Black woman, have more diversity in that interview panel. You can have five white male interviewing a Black man. We can never have anything. Let's get that fact. We should be able to, talk. We should be able to, relate. That alone, it's not their fault. I wouldn't blame them, but it's the system. It's systemic. Them not being able to, understand our realities. Makes this things worse. For me, those are like great roadblocks.
Yeah. So I just wanted to share a personal experience as well, since Collins was saying. So even beyond interview as well, promotions, what you get for your bonuses. When I'm around a table in some of these firms where I've worked, for instance, I'm thinking, we've got someone's picture in the center of the table. I'm the only person of color discussing about another. It's affecting your promotion. It's affecting your bonus. It's affecting your salary increase. And beyond systemic, I think it's actually groundbreaking. This whole thing it's going to take a multi-year journey, in my opinion. We need to see more people giving the opportunity. I think Meryl mentioned it earlier in the call, that equitable platform where we have we feel there's equity. It's not because I think that people around the table are actually racist because they have the color, but identification matters a lot, because at the end of the day, how would you feel year in, year out? You're not getting the bonus you think you ought to. And even if it was based on your performance, when you look at the people that decided the bonus for you that year, you have no choice but to think, well, there's nobody to represent me there anyway. And those are the kind of examples I remember thinking, this can't be right, because it's not balanced. Why are we discussing somebody when you don't even understand them? They don't feel you understand. They don't talk to each other. So I feel like when I see more people in senior management, and it's definitely executive level, people can start to feel that equality that we talk about, that systemic racism can begin to reduce, as it were, because right now it's in the air, it's intangible, but it's affecting all our lives.
I think a lot of what you guys have said echoes this idea of unconscious bias. And this is essentially when we have learned stereotypes that are automatic, unintentional, and so ingrained that they can actually influence our behavior towards oftentimes minority groups. And we all have this bias, as Trisha mentioned, because for the most part, we've all grown up in this heteronormative, Eurocentric, capitalist world. And so I think part of kind of looking and confronting that bias means looking at your privilege. And that means kind of asking yourself, okay, well, how does my experience differ from the Black communities, and what preconceptions do I have about my Black colleagues and my Black peers? So I guess the next question would sort of be, what has been your experience with microaggression? And microaggression, you could say, is one of the, it's indirect or unintentional expressions of racism that for the most part can come across in harmless comments that people make, and the people making them usually are kind of well-intentioned when they're doing it. So that's, again, open to anybody.
So this question is for me, when I saw it, it was one of the biggest one. I don't think we can actually exhaust it in this phone call, to be fair.
Yeah.
I know for a fact that we have to speak in a particular manner. We have to represent ourselves beyond our competencies, beyond our skills, in order to feel that one feels among. And personally, I can't count how many times my LinkedIn profile being checked after a meeting and prior to this is those microaggressions, and you think, okay, well, to the point you almost want to ask the other people on the team, saying, does anyone check your profile? Why is my profile being checked? Right? And the sad part of it, though, is I feel like most people of color have actually built a thick skin around it, because it's almost like you're used to it. What we are trying to say is not so much of calling people out, calling firms out, but I'd like to go in on my merits. I like to go in beyond what I, you know, where I'm born, where I was born, what I look like, just my purely on merits. If we really say that, you know, and I have to quickly digress that when we talk about the ecosystem, we're talking about just the corporate system. Now, there are two different parts of it. The individual racism that we face is completely different from the ones in the corporate ecosystem. But in the corporate ecosystem, where it's really nobody owns it, I should feel that balanced platform. Why should you always, you know, make me feel different because of things about what I look like? So a good example is that LinkedIn profile, for instance. I can't tell you how many times. And for me, I wish that didn't happen. I wish we were checking because we wanted to add each other or follow each other, not so much of you wondering what makes me think and why am I actually an exception. And so that's an example that I wanted to kind of, you know, share today.
Yeah, just to that piece in terms of the, sorry, go ahead. Was Simone?
No, sorry, Arnold, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, just to the piece about the microaggressions, it's very interesting because I have been, I've managed sales teams, you know, to the point of, you know, Anthony, to your point in terms of your LinkedIn profile and looking at your LinkedIn profile, where, you know, corporate, it's like, you know, even though LinkedIn isn't a, you know, a corporate standard, you know, you should have your LinkedIn profile, you know, with your picture on there. And I had two individuals on my team who were Black and said, you know what, I didn't want to put my LinkedIn profile on there because I'm calling into the US or I'm calling into a certain section. And if they look it up, I could lose business. That could hurt my pocket. So, you know, that is a real thing. The microaggressions that I felt personally is, you know, I'd mentioned that I grew up in the Bahamas, and there's, you know, I've been here for 30 years, and the first thing you say, you know, when people meet you and you know, you say grow up in the Bahamas, it's, well, that's funny, you don't have an accent.
Yes.
And I'm just like, how do you think people in the Bahamas speak? And the way that, you know, my parents raised me is, you know, you're gonna get off of this rock one day, and yeah, you can speak in a certain dialect when you're around your people and feeling comfortable, but you know, this is going to be the way of the world. And they think the whole purpose around microaggressions is they actually think they're complimenting you, exactly, in terms of what they're saying, and it's not the case. You know, who has had the situation where, you know, it's summertime or somebody comes from vacation and they walk up to you and put their arms against you and say, oh, I'm almost as dark as you. Like, really? Like, and you know, again, they think that's a complimenting piece. But you know, I've been in situations where, for instance, if I'm, you know, speaking in a corporate setting, speaking in a meeting, I've actually had somebody pull me aside and say to me, you know, you just speak a lot of big words, and if you didn't have your big words, you would have nothing else. Like, somebody actually said that to me, and I responded to them to say, are you implying that I have a lot of hubris? Of course, they didn't know the definition of hubris, and then I walked away at that point, right? So, you know, that is some of the microaggressions that you feel, that, again, they feel they're complimenting you, but you're really not.
Mm.
No.
You know, and you know, I think that's, you brought some excellent examples. You know, the women on the panel, we can all say, you know, someone has said, oh, you know, you're so confident in what you're presenting today, or wow, you speak so eloquently, or you're so well put together. It's like, okay, so how did you expect me to arrive to the office today? Or am I not allowed to speak with all the vocabulary that's available in my mind? I'm sorry, please help me understand why you think that my confidence somehow needs to be complimented in a way that actually is diminishing the respect that you think you're offering me. It's not respect, it's condescending.
Yeah, they always feel that, you know, you don't belong here. Like, okay, you're having a meeting, you're in the project team, you guys walk into the boardroom, like everybody's there. You see the white clients just walks in to listen to the presentation, and you know, you have like 5 white male, 1 white lady. They just shake all of them and think, oh, Collins is actually maybe the tech guy that is coming to fix up the you know, they just look, they don't say hello to you. It has happened to me so many times because I've been in sales in tech in the US before moving. So, and what I do is I make sure I own the presentation. Like, I make sure I present my part and, you know, wow everybody, because at the end of the day, we work so hard. We put more 100% than most of my colleagues. That's the honest truth, right? The white colleagues, most of them, we work more than them. So what I do is, when I've experienced that, I just say, you know what, I'm going to kill this presentation. I'm going to use all I have to kill this presentation. So after the presentation, be like, oh wow, I never knew you were part of the meeting. I thought you were like, you know, they thought they were, oh, you did well, but to me it's insulting. But what am I going to do? No, nothing. I can't do anything. I have to still pretend, oh, it's fine, everything is fine. You just move on, which is, you know, that, you know, demoralizes you. But you have to keep your job. You have to, you know, be a gate opener for another Black man to come into this company. You have to, you know, be better for them to, you know, give another Black person a chance into this company. So, you know, we just take it. But, you know, if there's a way we can stop that, you know, talk to them immediately. Yo, I'm part of this team. I work here. You know, I'm an associate here. In fact, I'm handling this. I'm your, you know, you talk to me. You're my clients personally. Just these people are my colleagues. I handle this project. I'm the project head. You know, it happens, but we can't. There's no way we can stop it. The only way we can stop it is keep recruiting more of our people into the company. If, you know, when we get there, you know, just have more of them. That's basically how it is. You know.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, you know, and you have the opportunity to, depending on your relationship with the people who may make those comments. I think a popular one for people of color is, you know, you're so articulate is like the popular insult. And I would say is definitely depending on your relationship, try to educate the person, because I will tell you, for example, when I worked out in Alberta, you know, a lot of the people that I worked with, you know, for example, one guy said, hey, you know, you're my first Black friend. And he was so proud and so happy. And I don't think he realized what he had said was sort of, you know, I had to educate him about, you know, tokenism and those types of things. And sometimes when you educate people because they're not exposed, you'll be surprised at how understanding they are. And the other thing I also want to point out is we're talking a lot about, you know, sort of white people. I had a great event with the Canadian Tamil Professional Association, where we talked about even these microaggressions and unconscious biases within minority communities, which happens because a lot of us have colorism within our own cultures. And so that does happen. And so we also not only have to do this for the Caucasians, but also for everyone else. If somebody says something, and even if it's you're not the person receiving that compliment / insult, stand up and say something and educate people, because at the end of the day, that's the only way that we're slowly going to change sort of people's mindsets, you know, one conversation at a time, right? So
yeah,
exactly, Meryl. I mean, people do need to take the opportunity to speak up. We do need to see whether or not it's to have a quick response, or to pull them aside and say, you know, I think this is a learning opportunity, or to have that one-on-one engagement to help them understand, okay, your behavior is actually impacting others around you, because the reality is they may not know that that is actually what's happening. So the opportunity to educate and inform, I think, is really the catapult in addressing microaggressions. And it may actually be that opportunity, as you said, Meryl, to ignite that change within them, to say, hey, oh, I didn't know that. Okay, what else about my behaviors that are coming across as anti-Black or anti-Semitic, or, you know, anti-fill in the blank? Because that actually is something that I don't want to connect myself with. I don't want to be that person in society that isn't welcoming, that doesn't have a sense of belonging for everyone that's part of my team or part of my community.
I think what I like about what you touched on is, like, education is key. And I think for a lot of the folks on this call, I'm sure you're wondering, you know, what is my role in all of this? And I think your role is definitely to not let me be the educator. And I think, like, you know, Rihanna said it best, you know, tell your white friends to pull up, like, tell everybody to do that, because at the end of the day, like, the bar is already very high for Black people to perform in their role. At the end of the day, we know that, like, we need to overperform to be performing. And so then for it to be my job, additionally, to be an educator is like the invisible backpack that I don't want to wear. And so I think that for the allies on the phone and the people who are saying, what does allyship look like? It looks like you also correcting those microaggressions. I think a couple instances for me, you know, when I was flying to a client a ton in LA, and I would be boarding, you know, first class, and
Yep.
there's always some looks. There's always a question,
Yep.
man. Are you lost? Do you need help? No.
Absolutely.
I'm sitting in first class.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, an ally for me in that moment is like, why are you asking what's going on here? I think, you know, I've been at parties before. Halloween is a great time to be an ally, where someone dressed up as Thomas Jefferson. And my question is, why are you dressing up as Thomas Jefferson? That was a rapist. That was a slave owner. And, you know, the response is, he was a man of his times. Well, you are a man of your times, and you're choosing to dress up like him. And so I think, you know, that's a moment that I could have used an ally. I think as a woman too, when folks say, you know, speak up more. No, tell the men in the room to step back. Because at the end of the day, like, a lot of women, you know, are not socialized to talk over other people. And a lot of men think that that is socially okay, and business environments encourage that. That is what, you know, speaking up looks like. And so I think I totally agree that education is key. But for those of us who are saying, so why become a better ally? You educate yourself, but you also become an educator, and you know, support in educating people, because it's too much for me to bear the weight of watching Black people continuously get killed on video and then go to work and have to educate somebody on why they can't ask to touch my hair. It's too much.
It is too much, you know. I think, and that's the reality of what I think the benefit of what you said, Simone, is the education piece needs to look like a baton. It needs to be passed on, that it's not just the responsibility of the Black person, or the token Black person, or the token BIPOC person in that office to say, oh, now I'm going to carry this weight of responsibility. It needs to be someone saying, okay, I would like to be the ally. I'd like to understand what it means to be an ally. And then what does it mean for me to also pass on the understanding and the ownership of allying for other BIPOC individuals? Because otherwise it ends up being bad, that engagement, that ownership of that responsibility of sharing and creating understanding, it doesn't spread, and it needs to spread.
Yeah, for me, allyship without intentionality is not allyship. You know, a true ally needs to be intentional about fixing the problem and not just being empathetic towards it. You know, my first advice would be, you know, to educate oneself about realities of Black community, you know, systemic racism, understand that it's not just today's thing, it's been affecting us. Better understand how to help make changes needed. So we need to, you know, be intentional. How do you want to, you know, focus on this? If you want to be an ally, you have to be intentional. You know, focus on a particular thing, and just being intentional is the key to allyship.
Yeah, I totally agree, Collins. I think that you know, it's definitely an uphill task, though. You know, I was just thinking about what Simone was saying, that 8 out of 10 times, especially even in the US, and I say this publicly, when I go for work, my heart palpitates, because I will always be profiled. I will definitely, like, it's almost, I didn't apply for global entry just for that reason. And I also have an opposite, because I have a Nigerian name and I sound very British. So someone's actually saying to me, oh, you know what, if you were behind the curtain, I would think that you were English. And I'm like, the passport says British though. And that's those kind of things that I'm so used to. And unfortunately, that's just the life that we live. I think one thing that we all have to agree on this phone call, though, is the more I see people like me where I go, the better I feel comfortable. If I'm at Business Lounge and I'm standing there, I don't want you to create a space and say, oh, now for people of color. Then I feel, you know, worse, because then you've actually basically now made it a bit too far. Yes, I agree that you've been an ally, but now you're almost making me an exception. What I just want you to do is just treat me as you treat yourself. It's as simple as that. As you treat yourself. You know, if you feel that you saw me last week, don't ask me why my company sent me to a meeting and going back on the same day. I get all questions like that. I mean, we're talking about allies because the people who can see eye to eye. How about the system that's against you too? I'm not going to talk to an immigration officer and say, oh, well, that's wrong. I have to sit down, and 2 hours of my time wasted because the system is against me just because of what I look like. And I always say to people, the more you go up in senior management, the more you try to break what you call the glass ceiling, the more you actually really know what it's like. It's a lot deeper than what we're actually seeing on the surface, for sure.
So just in the interest of time, I do want to leave some moments at the end for Q&A, but I guess I wanted to end on this important note. As all of you kind of mentioned at the start, the hype that came with the Black Lives Matter movement unfortunately is going to die down eventually. And I think that this is when our true intentions are going to be put to the test. So we have to understand that supporting this cause isn't going to be about, you know, going to one protest or, you know, retweeting this one hashtag. It's about, as all of you have mentioned, taking a stance in your day-to-day life. And it's about, you know, talking to your friends and your family when they make racist remarks, whether that's, you know, subtle or not, instead of just letting it be. Because again, as you all mentioned, Black people are going to continue fighting for this for however long it takes, and it's going to be up to, you know, us as the non-Black community to accept that, number one, we are part of that problem, and we have allowed it to reach this point. But at the same time, we definitely have the power and the choice and the agency to essentially cut racism out from future generations. So I guess the question becomes, how can we as employees and interns and students, academics, administrators, and policymakers, how can we push our companies and organizations to confront their racism? And how can we hold them accountable moving forward?
I'm happy to start here. I think there's three levers that I want to hit on, and the first one is an interpersonal one, and I want to challenge everyone who has never been the only one in a room. You have never been the only one. If you can count on, you know, 2 sets of hands, your Black friends. If you were able to text your Black friends over the past month to make sure they were okay, you don't have enough Black friends. Because to me, like, if something happens in the LGBTQ community, I'm not going to send that "Are you okay?" text, because there's so many friends of mine that identify that way. I'm going to find other ways to show up. I'm going to say, you know, what do I do on my own? And I'm not going to put the burden on them, because when I know a lot of people thought they were well-intentioned, and I am grateful for people checking up, because the alternative of not, you know, saying anything is definitely not it either. Sorry. But I think also when you ask, think about these moments as Black people are grieving. You know, if one of your friends loses somebody close to them and they're going through the grieving process, you're not saying, "How are you?" You're saying, "What can I do for you? Can I bring food to your house? Can I do something for you?" That's what you're saying. And so I think that's my interpersonal challenge, is if you've never been the only one in the room, go be the only one, and understand what that feels like, and build better and stronger relationships with Black people if you don't have enough of them. I think on the institutional level, I'm pretty sure all of us are operating in organizations that have Black, you know, groups of I run McKinsey's Black Employee Resource Group out of DC, and most recently started an allies version of it that is specifically for white people. And it's sort of a task force of us, and I'm working hand in hand with a good friend of mine to lead that. And I think, you know, whether you're in business school or you're in the professional world, like, figure out how you amplify Black voices within your company or your school and partner, and remember that that's not your space to lead necessarily, but more so to follow, but you have a responsibility to do the work. And then the last thing that I would say is educate yourself and educate the people around you. You know, if you don't know about environmental racism, I remember growing up finding out that 5 of the 7 trash incinerators in Boston were in low-income Black communities. Wow, mind-boggling. We are literally killing Black people. There's a lot of things that you need to research on Black wealth and redlining and the history of how Black people are made to be poor and made to be unhealthy in this country. Sorry, I'm speaking from the US perspective. But I think there's a lot of education that you need to do to better understand that everything you think you believe subconsciously about, you know, Black people was really created by the government or other systems at play.
Yeah, and I think that.
Go ahead, you can go.
So I think that from an institutional perspective, HR organizations are really going to struggle, because this is going to have to be a real paradigm shift for them. Because if you look at traditionally how HR organizations are formed, it's let's be inclusionary, right? Let's not talk about millennials and their struggles, because we should be treating us as individuals and inclusionary. So, you know, when notes start to come out and corporate notes about, you know, what has transpired, you see them kind of glossing over the issue. And that is where us as corporate citizens, or those of you who are then going to be interviewing at the jobs, say, you know, how are you ensuring that I'm heard? How are you ensuring that I'm acknowledged within this institution? So I think that needs to be that change that needs to happen in terms of challenging your firm to say, how am I going to be acknowledged? How am I going to be heard?
Yeah.
You know, I think one of the things that I need to see from corporations is, and I asked this question earlier this year, you know, large corporations, public or private, they have these diversity and inclusion questionnaires you're asked when you're applying for the roles. What are they doing with that information? And if they are doing any type of reporting within the corporation or to the public, what does that represent for the corporation? You know, because otherwise it feels like, and it has been, I'm sure for many BIPOC individuals, lip service. You're filling out the blank to say, okay, you know what, I'm from a visible minority group. I am female. I am XYZ. And yet, somehow, the corporation and the representation that's in the corporation has not changed. So to me, it really speaks to looking at HR metrics. It speaks to looking at what are they actually doing with that information in terms of the demographics in their organization? What does the demographics mean in terms of the roles they're selecting? You know, are they being are they simply leaning on biases? Oh, if I'm in IT, this person is going to be skilled because they look like this, and they seem to fit in the blank. You know, to Meryl's earlier point, when we look at BIPOC communities, what our skill sets and our experiences speak to will not look the same as traditional colonial privileged experiences look like. So we need to really peel off what the metrics or the framework is for someone who's qualified, and take that off of the expectation of trying to identify who the best candidate is for that role. That's really my viewpoint on this, because until we actually target what it is they're using the information for and transforming that into, we need to do some reporting. Okay, what does 6 months out, if you're a large company and you keep having recruitments and selection and yada, 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 what does that look like for your organization? Is it actually leading to change? That I'd
And I think that you
say from the bank perspective, they're not really, so a lot of, I guess, for the big FIs are collecting information, but they're doing really nothing with it, right? Because there's not been a catalyst to force them to actually say, these are our stats and they look bad, right? And
right,
so
I know that.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to get at is, for example, I keep going back to the Black Month Initiative. I just think it's such an important time right now. So if you work at a corporation, write a letter to your CEO, ask them, have they heard of this? Are they joining? Because what this is going to do is help them be part of a bigger collective to be more intentional about actually doing something. One. Two, one of the other things that Coffee is looking at doing is actually doing a research study around the Black experience on Bay Street. And the reason behind this is because we find that a lot of times when we talk about experiences, it's either anecdotal or we're quoting stats from the US. We need to shape our own narrative as Canadians to talk about what it is that we're experiencing, what those issues are, and help the industry better understand them and hold them accountable. I also think that, again, to the point that was made earlier about even asking them, how are they going to advocate or represent your group when you're in the company? And started when I was looking at MBA programs, right? I would look at the US versus Canada. I'll give you a perfect example. And I would ask them, what does diversity look like? For Canadian academic institutes, the answer would always be, oh, well, we have a lot of women. And that was always the answer. When I talked to an American school, it was, they had programs on programs on programs. Not that America, is necessarily better, they have their own issues. But I think we really have to get behind being intentional about where we shop and spend our money, when we're interviewing, asking those questions, even being selective in who we go to work for. Don't just go work for somebody because it's a big name and you want to have that on your resume. Think good and hard about because you have to be there for 8+ hours a day. And that's going to be an emotional toll on you every single day.
Yeah.
When you don't fit in, you don't feel like you're having progression. And if you're not progressing in your career, it's harder for you to leave and go and work somewhere else and move up in your career. So you have to feel that you are part of the fabric of what they're creating, and be very, and remember that you still, at the end of the day, are a contributing person towards the economy, and you have that power, right? No matter how low you are on the ladder when it comes to corporations, you still have that power when you think about how you're sort of going to engage with them. So those are the things that I would share, and I'm sure some of the other panelists probably have other tips as well.
I also think that we should, again, following the conversation is never going to be enough. We can come out with actionable items, but I'm all about empowerment. And I like to tell everyone on the phone call that you absolutely have the power to make a change. That's the fact. It's not easy. I'll tell you a bit of reality. Definitely, you'll definitely feel like an exception, because you are seen as an exception in most cases. However, start to learn how to use the instruments available around you to step on that platform as well. One good example is speak up. When you're having a one-to-one with your managers, talk. That's what it's there for. Don't just talk about what is great on the documents or on the systems. Talk the talk and walk the walk. Then at least you can say, well, Collins or Brian had the same conversation with you and you had no problem with it. So use the platforms available for you. I know it's not easy, but make sure, because that's your biggest tool. Use the laws, use the opportunities and the avenues. A very good example in the interest of time, a small story. I was president of African Caribbean Society at my university in England. And we were like minority. We couldn't have been as much minority as minority can be. Now, one of the policies was that 65, you have to be 200 to make a society that can get funding from the government for all the activities you have to do. We had to turn around and added a lot of non-Blacks to make up our numbers. What did we use the funding to do? Black History Month. We had the biggest Black History Month in that area than we ever did before. So the point is, if we didn't think about expanding and using the avenues around us, we'll never make a change. So again, think about the funding available to you, think about the platforms available to you, use them, because that's the beginning of how you can make that change.
Yeah, to me, I just feel that this company was what we call quick fix. They employ a Black person today. They feel they've done a lot for the Black community. Meanwhile, they're just using us as a poster child, a poster employer. So what we have to do, if we get ourselves into that position, we should be able to utilize that position. Like, okay, I'll give, for instance, a Black person was made CMO of Netflix recently, and all that triggered because of the whole Black Lives Matter thing. That was how she was, lifted from Endeavor to Netflix as a CMO. Yeah, now she is, to me, I see her as a poster child for this company. But now she is in the management position. So it's on her to utilize her platform, her power in the management level to recruit a whole lot of Black people. That is how you're going to, make that company more diversified. You're the only Black person in the management team since the whole time of Netflix. So, we should be able to not let them, yes, they're using us as a poster child, not let them use us as a poster child. Use that platform to grow more Black people, grow more people of color in that company. Utilize that opportunity, give your peers, people like you, a chance, to, get to that same level with you. That's how, that's all I will say about this.
So I do want to get to some of the questions that a lot of the attendees have been asking in the chat box. So I'm going to pass it on to my colleagues Matt and Ashima. They're going to just take turns and pose those questions to the panelists.
Perfect. Thank you, Ali, and thank you everyone for being so genuine, fearless in the discussions that we've had. Our participants have some great questions out here, and I'll just start off with the first one. It says, how important is the connection between really addressing anti-Black racism work and a fundamental reckoning of extractive, profit-only, exploitative capitalism? So I'm going to repeat that again. How important is the connection between really addressing the anti-Black racism work and a fundamental reckoning of extractive, profit-only, exploitative capitalism?
So to me, that's sounding like, all the marketing and branding aspect that people are concerned with, right? Like, is this a marketing ploy? Because really and truly, the world is at a standstill. And I think you know, because we've had this health crisis, and it is the beauty of that. We've had this health crisis where the world had to stand still, and then the realities of anti-Black racism in the States and in North America broadly actually got to be heard and felt and amplified the reality of this needs to change. And if we're not actually committing ourselves to genuine changes, and as I said, we need to put in some hard metrics, this is just lip service, right? And I think that's a concern that this question is raising. So what that to me again speaks to is, are the CEOs, are the executive teams, the board of directors, are they really understanding that the world is looking at your behaviors, looking at the decisions that you're making, looking at how you're deciding the issues, and saying, is this actually inclusive? Is this demonstrating a desire for people to belong in your organizations, for people to support your organization? Again, going back to ethical consumerism, because you know, the reality is that this, as we've said, as was echoed in the call earlier, it could fade away. This momentum could fade away. But if you want to be genuine, you need to actually put in systemic changes. You need to actually enforce these changes. You need to look at who are the members of society, and they don't necessarily have to be having specific titles or whatever the case is, but they know how to use tools, use resources to support the changes that you need to incorporate in your organization. So if you're looking for an Indigenous voice, you need to say, okay, is this Indigenous voice in my business? And who are they as Indigenous individuals in my business see as leaders in their community as well? And how do we encourage them to connect with the community that they already know and the community that they see inside the organization? And to me, that's where, you know, it moves from being just a talk piece from a marketing tool to, you know, 5 years from now, wow, look at the change, look at the improvements this corporation has taken on, and look at the attrition rate that has just fallen off because people want to stay because they see the leaders actually doing something. That to me is what it looks like. That's the difference.
Yeah, I think maybe a little bit optimistic, but I do see a lot of these companies doing a bit of pandering right now. And to be honest, I'm not really upset by it, because to me it says there's been a switch in companies' head that says, you know, not being supportive of the Black community has a consequence for my bottom line. And that is the impetus for change in capitalism, just like period. And so I'm not upset by it. And also I will dovetail that by saying that Gen Z, for all the complications that they bring, has a different conscience that I think we haven't seen before. And I look at younger generations who are holding companies accountable and saying that, like, I will not support you if you do not support the things that I believe in. And like, that's a very new thing. And so I'm inspired by Gen Z. And I'm also saying, you know, CEOs, at the end of the day, this is going to start hitting your bottom line, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. You know, McKinsey has produced tons of research around why diversity matters. And a lot of that, you know, started definitely from our, I think, you know, perspective of saying, like, we know this matters, but we have to prove to CEOs that this impacts your bottom line. And as the years continue, it's only going to become more relevant, you know, that you need to have a diverse board to be successful, because the population is getting browner, because people are becoming more diverse, because gender is becoming more fluid, because being transgender is socially acceptable. And so I think, like, when I marry the reality of where I think society is going with capitalism, I am actually a little bit more optimistic, despite the fact that I do think some of it is definitely pandering. I think that accountability will come and companies will see it's best for them to be more inclusive.
I agree. Some more questions, or?
Yeah, we do have some more questions. I'm going to go back. This one came in earlier on in the call. This is from Dion. And this gets a bit at the discussion about human resources that came through today. So the question is, what can companies do to encourage students to pursue professional paths earlier in their educational journey, so that they're not selected out from the degree programs that would enable them to pursue that career path? So kind of getting into the machinations of the professional pathway and looking at what companies could be doing or should be doing to offer further opportunities for direct professional experience and sort of interrupt the singularity of flow from academy to the workforce.
Yeah, I can
So
speak to that.
this is really where the issue is for me personally, and I would say this. Sorry for cut you in there. I've known people who are my direct bosses that who I've been in their roles purely because they got there, and that's where that privilege part comes into play. I feel that what that question is about is companies need to make sure that the path is drawn for everybody. I'll give you an example. People management or cost management. You will never know how that works unless you're in certain roles. And you never know how good you are if you don't get to that spot as well. I personally, I've realized a lot more competencies because of the levels that I've reached. And they were actually easier to execute. But I always ask myself, I could never know this if I never got to this role. So I feel companies need to actually open that up for everybody because, you know, quite frankly, I don't get derailed by signatures. Anybody can really get to where they need to do if they focus on what they need to get to. But companies need to start to draw a path to say, okay, I've seen you around for 2 years. What are your, the next steps? How many courses have you done? This is what we think you should do to enable you. We see that happening, but it's not happening enough. I think that's the right answer. To be intentional, action plans against everybody. But this is also off the background of what we spoke about earlier in all the questions. If the platform is not available for you to have it, then why even think about how to progress?
Yeah, and going out to job fairs when individuals are in university is one thing, and showing up there. But I do feel, and I've always been a firm believer, that we need to get out to grade 10, 11, and 12, because that is where they feel whether they belong or not. I've had conversations and I've talked about sales, and their eyes just glaze over because they're like, no, I don't. That is not something I want to do. And part of it is making sure that we're making it relatable to them, right? So I said, you talk about sales. Well, what is sales today? Sales is driving relationships. I talk about when I'm doing research for my customers and I have to go on LinkedIn. Sometimes I go on Twitter. I get as much intel as I can about that customer before I go and have that conversation, and making it relatable to say, hey, you're using the same social tools. These are things that are applicable to you. I think those are the things we need to do. Is we need to get into the schools and we need to bridge that digital divide, especially as technological companies. And that's why, part of the subcommittee that I'm running, one of the 3 pillars, one pillar is internally, how do we build allyship and how do we help people on that journey? The second piece is, how do we get the pipeline, the actual talent pipeline there? But the third piece is the digital divide, right? There are individuals, within organizations, and why we continuously have the same people who are showing up for jobs is the referral system. Is we keep going to the same people and they keep bringing their own sphere into those conversations. So what are we doing to bridge that digital divide and have these people who might not have exposure to a certain community going into those communities and having those conversations? We need to get them earlier in terms of high school.
Yeah, I agree. I think high school is really important, especially because we need to educate kids about the different types of careers that are out there, as well as now because we're battling sort of, a little bit of competition of why go to university if I can be an influencer and make way more money than mom and dad, going viral all the time, right? And so educating them on sort of, hey, you're studying law, but you want to get into fintech. Here's kind of somebody who kind of does it, and this is the path that they took. I also think companies need to be very targeted in how they approach universities. So, for example, Coffee, every year in September, we host an annual youth summit. We bring in a wide range of companies, and it's a great place for them to come in. And typically, we'll tell corporations come in with the intent of, I have 10 spots, 20 spots for Black students. And I'm going to make sure I try to source them here. And they're across the enterprise, right? Economics, finance, legal, tech, whatever that may be. Because what we find is they'll go to the traditional schools. They will not find us there. So having them come to a space like Coffee, and I'm sure there's many other programs in Canada and the US that are similar to this, where they can look for these candidates, non-traditional candidates, again, because they're not necessarily at the Ivy Leagues. They may be a college student as opposed to an undergrad or master's student. And sort of having access and having that conversation with the kids, seeing them perform, whether it's in a hackathon, case competition, these types of things, being intentional in that way. And I guess even for you guys as students, you know, when you're interviewing, asking that question, I'm applying to be an intern or a co-op student or whatever that is. What does that pool look like? How many people of color did you hire last year? Can you break that down for me? How many by racialized groups? Just kind of sort of nudging them, so it kind of forces them to keep having to be ready with those stats and to really think about, because it's usually the same HR people going to campus to do the recruiting. So when they keep hearing that question, it's going to force them to have to look internally and say, okay, maybe we kind of have to start, hiring these other groups, and because they're not going to lie to you about the fact that they hired just one Black intern and maybe one Indigenous, and
Well, I would even say the opportunity to start the conversation about career paths and going after goals is even younger. Like I can't remember how young I was, but seeing Johnny Cochran on TV was a huge, like, oh my God, there is someone, person of color in a suit, like telling it as he sees it to a judge. That's okay. I want something close to that, whatever that looks like. Like that's impressive. And so there's a ton of opportunity to say, okay, who are the individuals who these young ones can say, wow, you are a representation of success, or you're a representation of a role that I want to take on in life, and actually be out there speaking to these roles. Because I think part of the challenge is that, for young BIPOC groups, there's very fixed identities as to what success looks like. And we need to say success looks very, like there's so much opportunity as to what success looks like. It's not just, in sports or in entertainment. Like there's success in business, there's success in arts, there's success everywhere. So it's for the individuals who are cutting their teeth, who are becoming leaders right now, to say, I am going to actually take that opportunity to go and give back. Because in giving back, I'm now creating the roots for the younger ones to come up and say, I can also do this as well.
The one thing I wanted to add to what Meryl said too is, like, really a great way to show up as an ally is to put that pressure on. It's for you to walk in the room and say, where are the Black people? Because they expect it from me. I do it all the time, but it's going to mean so much more when everybody starts asking that question. And it's not just where are the Black people, it's, where are the lesbian women? Like, where are all the populations that we don't see, where are they? And we need, if everyone commits to putting that pressure on senior leaders, I can't imagine where we would be, because for so long it's been, just those small groups who already don't have voices banging against the door. And it's like, the reason why this moment is so significant, I think, is, I've been going to marches in the vast, I can't get a picture that doesn't have white people in it. And that's so exciting for me, because it's like, and previously that couldn't be further from the truth. It was all Black people showing up to all Black, events to support Black people. And now it's like, the sort of support is overwhelming, and I just really push everyone who says they're an ally. Don't let me be the one who says, where are the Black people? Like, you should be the one who's saying, all of the CEOs are men, where are the women? All of the CEOs are white, where are Black people? And doing that for, all of the underrepresented groups who don't have a voice.
Yeah, I used to have a colleague too that she's white, she has 2 adopted kids, they're Black. So whenever she goes to a party, a colleague's party, she'll be like, where are your Black friends? If you don't have Black friends, she'll be like, no, that's what she said. She's white. She'll ask her, where are your Black friends? Everybody's white. This Collins is the only Black person here. So you telling me you don't have Black friends for your party? Then I'm not comfortable here, because my daughter is not comfortable. Nobody's comfortable. She's white. So we have to show that ally. We have to, be able to, be the one to tell our friends, where are your friends? You have to pull up. You have to pull up for your friends. You have to be able to, show concern that you really care about what these people are going through. And if you don't have Black friends, then I'm not sure you care about what these people are going through. So yes.
Well, I think, you know, the reality of someone who doesn't have BIPOC relationships, whatever degree of intimacy that is, or strength that it is their own, you know, that phrase, white frailty. You know, oh, I don't want to really explore the realities of others because, you know, oh, that's out of my frame, and I don't want to mess with the frame I've created. And it's okay, well, how far are you going to keep going in today's world if you're going to be closed off to everything else? Because as Simone said, the world is getting pretty colorful these days. So you're basically closing yourself off to your own self.
I think we're kind of pushing it time-wise, so I think we'll do one more question.
Right.
Yes, so we have a lot of questions around how do we identify, like as prospective candidates, how do we identify which corporation is genuinely caring about having an equitable workforce, or is it just to drive up those numbers? Because we want to be attached to an organization who includes having an equitable workforce as part of their purpose, rather than just a one-time effort.
I mean, I think that's a very difficult question, right? Because there's going to be a lot of them who right now have traditionally done nothing, or they've done very little, and now they're waking up. And, you know, they've made a bold statement, and maybe they've made these commitments of what they're going to do. And there's a particular organization that's in that category, which I shall not name. But you know, you kind of have to give them a chance to prove themselves. So what I will say is, you know, I mean, look, at the end of the day, if you're somebody and you have multiple offers, you know, from somewhere places you want to work at, you can really look at what they're doing and how long they've been doing and investing, right? And not just looking at what did they do, for example, in terms of the Black community, what did they do for Black History Month, but what do they continuously do year round? Because that's the one thing that we also find is they might do a lot for Black History Month, but there's nothing happening the other 11 months of the year. So just looking really at, you know, what's their track record, but also at the end of the day, you know, if you're a student and you get a job, you know, giving the benefit of the doubt, and once you get in, advocating, joining your, you know, employee resource groups, trying to figure out ways that you can internally sort of advocate for starting things, even if it's during your internship program, whatever that looks like, because one, it makes you look good as well, because you're being proactive and being in the community, but also sometimes starting those conversations, starting those narratives, and sometimes you might get a little bit of pushback on that, but knowing kind of how to push and how to sort of initiate conversations or small scale events that hopefully over time will kind of snowball into something bigger.
Yeah, and I think in
I
Canada,
think another opportunity is where the individual can actually just scroll to LinkedIn and see who's an employee at that company and say, hey, you know, I've got this opportunity to work here. Do you have a few moments I can chat with you? Because I'd just like to know a bit more about what they're doing in terms of diversity and inclusion, and what's your take on it? Because, you know, sometimes, again, the lip service, they have great website on diversity and inclusion efforts, but really you need to hear some on the ground messages as to what that looks like and what their actions are telling you about the intentions.
yeah, and I think in Canada, the challenge is because we don't, because the diversity numbers are captured, but they're not necessarily shared in a public forum, is always a challenge in terms of then to ask that question. But some of the questions you can ask is, you know, how do you measure diversity, right? Is it a business line item? Is it something that you're accountable to for shareholders? Because if they look at, you know, diversity as, you know, URMs are underrepresented minorities and white women, then they're going to be doing a victory lap in terms of their diversity numbers, right? And patting themselves on the back. So, you know, ask the question in terms of how they're looking at that and how it's baked into their DNA in terms of their culture as a business line. I think that can help also in terms of those qualifying questions.
Yeah, I agree.
Great. Thank you all. I think with that, we'll bring the Q&A portion to an end. And at this stage, just on behalf of Net Impact Schulich, I just want to effusively reiterate thanks to all of our wonderful panelists this evening. We so greatly appreciate you taking time out of your days to participate, to share so generously, and to be amenable to meeting us in this virtual space. So thank you all around to the panelists, to Aileen for doing such a fantastic job of moderating and organizing, And to all of our attendees on Zoom, such great discourse in the chat and such great questions. At this stage for our audience, we encourage you to stay online for the brief networking session to follow. We'll send you out into some breakout rooms where the conversation can continue. And thank you again, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.
Thank you.
So if anybody is interested, feel free to stay online. We'll give it a few minutes, and then we can distribute everybody into the breakout rooms. Okay, so I think the number has been steady for a bit. Perfect. So you guys should be invited to go to the rooms.
Are people in? I don't see anybody.
Oh, you guys did not get notified for a breakout room?
I was supposed to go in one, and then it sent me back here.
Huh, 1 second. Let me just change that straight.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No problem. No worries. Oh, oops, I'm sorry. Okay.
Did that work? Perfect.